What's up, everyone? Welcome and thanks for joining us for the very first episode of a show we're going to call DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. The plan is for this to exist as a weekly online show that I'll be hosting alongside of a number of the other writers and guests from Dodger Blue. And I know it's kind of a weird time to be launching a show. It's a weird season of the world, and we're all trying to figure out this new normal. But our goal here is just figuring some folks could use a break. We could use a respite, something to talk about other than anxiety and danger and fear and all that. So at least for a little while, once a week, we're going to try and do that for you. My name's Jeff Spiegel. I'm a writer at Dodger Blue, and I've been writing about the Dodgers online for about 8 years here now. And today I'm joined by the managing editor of Dodger Blue, Matt Moreno, who's going to be one of the regular guests on the show. And so the plan for today is really, really simple. We're just going to try and hit a few topics. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about what's going on with baseball. We'll discuss something that Andrew Friedman said last week about what kind of danger 2020 and the season might be in. Then we'll chat a little bit about Mookie Betts before ending with the most important thing, I think, which is the bracket the Dodgers put out last week regarding one's favorite Dodger in franchise history. But before we get any of that, Matt, how are you holding up?
I'm doing well. Obviously, being in downtown with the safer at home orders has changed living a little bit, but doing my part to stay safe, stay inside, and we have, as people have seen, I'm sure on our social media channels, we're encouraging everybody to kind of follow suit, because the quicker everybody kind of gets in line, hopefully baseball comes back and really sports as a whole and everything. People can go back to work. The economy obviously can rebound. So just doing well.
Yeah, I love that. Someone was saying, hey, if you don't care about everybody else's lives that you're putting at risk by going out, maybe you could at least stay inside for the sake of all of us being able to watch sports here pretty soon. So it's kind of like, hey, you know what? Whatever it takes to get people to stay inside, we'll do it. So, hey, without further ado, let's just dive in to what I was talking about. Last week, Andrew Friedman, general manager, president of the Los Angeles Dodgers, hopped on a conference call. And I think one of the most fascinating things that he said was this. He was asked, could he say with any certainty that MLB will have some sort of 2020 season? And here was his answer, quote, "I don't think anybody can say anything with certainty right now about anything." Now, Matt, you and I are not medical experts. We're not health experts. But what do you make of this? I mean, it's kind of a freaky thing to think. Is it really possible that the 2020 season as a whole is going to get wiped out?
I think it's a little bit of a scary reality. I mean, unfortunately, you probably can't necessarily rule something like that out. I'm of the opinion that at some point there will be baseball games, and maybe it's just me being optimistic and hopeful. But I know Friedman did say that on what would have been opening day last Thursday. I think more of it is just, and it's true, you can't really take anything for granted at this point. I mean, we've seen how quickly things have changed from one day to the next, 1 week to the next. So, you can't say for certainty, oh, by June we're going to have opening day. You can hope for the best. And what he did also say on that call, and I'm sure you'll touch on as well, is everybody seems invested in getting a season going. So that's encouraging. But really, I mean, they're at the behest of, the virus and kind of MLB and health experts.
Yeah, and it's weird because, the first thing to go was these large gatherings of people, getting a ton of people into one place at one time. And so if that's the first thing to go, you can pretty safely assume it's going to be the very last thing to come back. Now, of course, there's baseball games with no crowds and that kind of thing. But, baseball is such a unique thing because there's so many guys on a roster in the clubhouse. I mean, you've got 25. They were going to expand to 26 people this year, and then add on top of that the whole coaching staff, the training staff, everybody that travels with them, plus the fact that they're going through airports and on planes and all of that kind of thing. And so it does seem like this might be sort of in as much jeopardy as any of the sports that we're really talking about right now.
Right. That's a great point. I mean, baseball with the restrictions on mass gatherings, as you just outlined, baseball pretty much can't start right now.
Yeah, because they get to 100 people without any fans in the stands, basically. Umpires, there's all sorts of people. And so it's a fascinating thing. And like you said, I mean, it's so much of this is the unknown, and we just can't predict what 30 days from now looks like or feels like, or, what the new normal will be at the end of that. And so it's definitely something that we'll keep an eye on. And I think as Dodger fans, that kind of leads us into the second major thing that came about, is that the owners and the players union came to an agreement about, okay, what do we do? Like, if worst case scenario, 2020 doesn't happen. What do we do? And if you're a Dodger fan, you probably already know what I'm about to say because it's worst case scenario, which is if the 2020 season doesn't happen, any player who is set to enter free agency a year from now would still do so, which means Mookie Betts, who the Dodgers just traded a handful of prospects for, might never play as a Dodger. Matt, on a scale of 1 to 10, how panicked are you about the prospect of Mookie Betts maybe never playing for the Dodgers?
I think you probably have to put that right now at about a 7. Like I said, I think I'm optimistic that there will be some sort of baseball season and playoffs that we get, whether it's 50 games, 75 games, 100 games, obviously remains to be seen. But that is definitely a strange twist. Obviously, when the Dodgers traded for Betts and David Price, a lot of the thinking was, okay, for this season, hopefully he helps you win a World Series. And I think most people were probably already writing it off as basically a one-year rental, just because some of the Dodgers, under this front office, their history with big free agents. And now, obviously at that time, nobody would have guessed, well, wait a minute, there's a chance that he might not play one game for the team.
I know. It's crazy. It's crazy. And to think that somehow we might get to the end of this and say the Red Sox won the trade is crazy. And honestly, the more I thought about it, the more I realized, if this worst case scenario plays out, I would argue that the Dodgers, maybe more than any other team in all of baseball, would be penalized by it, because not only would you be losing Mookie Betts, who is arguably their best player, but also you think about every single guy that the Dodgers have on basically a rookie contract, guys who have not gotten to free agency yet. Every single one of those guys would be losing 1 year of cost-controlled prime. So Bellinger gets 1 year closer to free agency without ever having played. Seager, Buehler, May, Lux, just go all the way down the line. And those are guys that the Dodgers are able to go out and spend on a Mookie Betts and spend on Kershaw and Turner and Jansen and unfortunately AJ Pollock. But the reason they can do those things is because they have so much cheap, affordable talent. And so that's the other piece of this that I think is really, really fascinating. But getting back to Betts, this was something you and I had talked about a little bit earlier, which is I was thinking to myself, and it's an interesting question, do you think if this season doesn't happen, do the Dodgers' odds of being able to re-sign Mookie Betts change? Do you think if he never plays for the Dodgers, does that help the Dodgers? Does that hurt the Dodgers? Or is it just you have no idea?
I don't necessarily think it'll sway it too significantly one way or the other. Another interesting factor and layer to all of this is if no games are played. I read, I believe Jeff Passan and the name escapes me, from Fangraphs, who's now with ESPN. They combined to write the article. Luxury taxes would not be paid, so that essentially gets reset if there's a lost season. So maybe the Dodgers feel like they have a little bit more financial flexibility to go out and re-sign Mookie even if he didn't play a game for them. But either way, I don't know if it really impacts it too much.
Yeah, that is interesting because the Dodgers were expected to go above the luxury tax threshold for the first time in a few years this year. And so if that doesn't happen, then like you said, maybe they would be more willing to do so. It was just an interesting thought because I put myself in his shoes, and I don't know anything about Mookie Betts. By all accounts, he's a good dude and well-liked and, whatever. But I was thinking to myself, if I had been traded for by the Dodgers, if the Dodgers had given up a number of assets to acquire me, I wonder, do I feel any sort of obligation? If I literally never played a game, whether it's by injury or some fluky, crazy thing like we're seeing right now, would I feel any sort of obligation to the Dodgers? Maybe it's even just something as simple as, hey, whatever deal I have on the table, you will have the last say. And maybe that doesn't happen. Of course, if the season were to happen, maybe he has an amazing experience and the Dodgers' odds go up. But I don't know. That was just an interesting thought that crossed my mind is worst case scenario is he never plays and then he leaves. But I wonder if him never playing actually could shift things. But, like you said, it's a fun hypothetical. These are the things we're left to talk about in the season of the world that we're currently in. But I don't know. It's a crazy time to be a Dodger fan and be thinking about Mookie Betts.
Yeah, the way this season, the outlook of this season in 2020 is it's remarkable how quickly it changed and how drastically it changed.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Well, before we go, like I said, let me turn to what I find to be the most interesting thing. Like everybody else on Twitter, the Dodgers decided to put out a bracket of things, and they released a 64-man bracket for your all-time favorite Dodger. And they didn't list any seeds. They did it March Madness style, but it sure does seem like they followed the March Madness sort of approach to things, even if there aren't numbers next to them. And so I'll admit, I have a couple issues with the bracket that they sent out. And my number one issue is this. Eric Gagne as a number 16 seed against Jackie Robinson. I mean, first of all, is that not the weirdest matchup that you've ever imagined? Like, did you ever think that Eric Gagne and Jackie Robinson would make it into the same sentence? But I love Gagne, probably irrationally so to some degree. But this guy was a Cy Young Award winner. He was the most dominant closer in baseball for multiple years. I would say if my life depended on one pitcher in baseball history getting me one out, I honestly think I would take roided up Eric Gagne in his prime over anybody. Rivera, whoever else you want, like give me Gagne for one out. Plus he had the goatee, he had the legendary entrance, he had the epic shirts with the beard coming off of it. Like I'm thinking about all of that, and how does that guy get the 16 seed? Like, how does he get a 16 seed?
Well, like you mentioned, you would take him on steroids. So I think the team, just speculating here, kind of factored that into his history and his track record. But yeah, I mean, he's got no shot against Jackie Robinson. I mean,
yeah,
you kind of feel bad for him.
And can I make this note real quick? Kike Hernandez somehow made the list of 64 Dodgers, and he's ranked higher than Eric Gagne. Kike Hernandez.
I mean, hey, it's the rally banana. He's popular. He's versatile.
It feels like a little bit of recency bias to me, but like you said, Gagne, Jackie Robinson, there's no competition there. Let me give you a few other matchups that I found to be really, really interesting, and I'll get your take on. The first one, I think, which would probably be the most interesting or the most hotly debated with so many aspects to it, is actually the one on the line right below Gagne versus Jackie Robinson. It's the 8-9 matchup, if you will, and it is Shawn Green versus Kenley Jansen. So who do you got, Shawn Green or Kenley Jansen?
I'm going to go Shawn Green, and I think had Kenley not kind of struggled the way he has in 2018 and then again last season more so, he might have won it for the recency bias that you kind of touched on. But I think people, because of that, and Shawn Green obviously has that monster day against the Brewers, all the runs. I think he's a popular figure. He's still around. He does sports in LA. I think he'll advance there.
Yeah, Green feels like he has the advantage of he was the best player on the Dodgers for a large chunk of time. It wasn't the most productive time in the world, but it was there. I mean, he was really, really good for a long time, and I think you're right. I think Jansen, if we're having this conversation 10 years from now, it's probably a little bit more interesting. But I do think Jansen is hurt by the fact that he's on the downward slope, it feels like, of his career. And as a guy who's still the highest leverage reliever that gets put out there, that's not a good spot to be in. So let me fire off. I got 3 more on here for you, and then you can give me any observations you've got. Here's a pitchers matchup that I thought was pretty interesting. Ramon Martinez versus Walker Buehler. Ramon Martinez versus Walker Buehler. Let me give you a few stats on Ramon Martinez because I had to look these up myself. 1990 and 1991 seasons, Ramon Martinez, in 2 years, he won 37 games, 19 losses. He threw over 450 innings pitched, so he's averaging about 225 innings. And overall, he had an ERA just over 3. Now, those were his peak years, but obviously he's done it for longer than Buehler. So what do you got there?
I'm going Walker Buehler. I think there's recency bias. I think there's upside. And I think people like kind of not the brash attitude that Buehler has, but I'm sure you've seen he's been caught by a hot mic a couple times celebrating. And in this day and age with social media and things going viral, I think that stuff plays. And especially, the Dodgers obviously shared this on social media, Twitter. I think that'll favor Buehler.
Yeah. The fact that you're a current player definitely doesn't hurt. I think you're right. I mean, Ramon Martinez, the more I looked at it, he had 2 unbelievable years, but beyond that, he was an above average pitcher. Whereas I think we all look at Walker Buehler and say, this is a guy that could put 5, 6, 7 all-star appearances on his resume before it's all said and done. Okay, I've got 2 more for you, and then we'll look at the 1 seeds, and you can tell me what you think. The next one, Matt Kemp versus Raul Mondesi. This one's fascinating. Two outfielders, two guys that kind of play similar styles of baseball, just eras apart. So Matt Kemp versus Raul Mondesi. Again, I'll give you some statistics because I found this to be fascinating. Mondesi career average 273, Kemp career average 285. Mondesi on base percentage career 331, Kemp 337. Mondesi and Kemp the exact same 485 slugging percentage. Mondesi had two 30 home run, 30 stolen base seasons. Kemp, of course, had one, but it was nearly a 40-40 season. Kemp has 281 home runs, Mondesi 271, Mondesi 229 steals, Kemp 183. The difference between the two, Mondesi 7 seasons with the Dodgers, Kemp 10 seasons with the Dodgers. The point of all this is to say, is it's really fascinating when I went back and looked at how similar these two guys were. You can forget Mondesi. He kind of got lost in the shuffle with Karros and Piazza and all the guys that they had back then. But, I mean, to think that basically over the course of his career, he was Matt Kemp, that surprised me a little bit. So Kemp versus Mondesi, who do you like?
Yeah, that is definitely surprising. I would not have expected their stats to be that close. And having said that, I'm still going to go with Kemp. I think what he has working in his favor is basically what most fans consider an MVP season when it, of course, went to Ryan Braun and then it became tainted after the fact. And also Kemp's second tour with the Dodgers, it was successful.
Yeah.
He was a right-handed bat. He was productive for them. When they made that trade, he wasn't even expected to be to make the team. He wasn't expected to go to spring training. They couldn't find anybody else to take him on, so that he went to Camelback Ranch, won the job in left field, and had a strong season.
Yeah, I actually just wrote the number 3 game of 2018, which was Kemp, basically with his second game-winning hit in a row off of Arizona. And you're right, it's pretty remarkable. I think that definitely helps. However, Raul Mondesi's my guy. Mondesi is my freaking guy. My brother was a Piazza fan, but Mondesi, the right fielder, the cannon, he was basically Puig 20 years before Puig with probably a little bit better attitude in the clubhouse. But I love Mondesi. I love him. I love him. I love him. And so Mondesi's going deep in the bracket for me. Let me give you one last one.
Okay.
This is a potential second-round matchup. I feel pretty safe penciling these two in. And if we're talking about overall career resumes, one guy is a Hall of Famer, the other is not a Hall of Famer. However, in a bracket which is your favorite player, it's an interesting one. Mike Piazza versus Hyunjin Ryu.
Ooh, this is interesting. I would go with Piazza, but I think there might be some fans who harbor resentment towards him just with the way everything it wasn't necessarily his fault, but obviously the split with the Dodgers, but things that he has kind of said after the fact.
It's not pretty.
Yeah, but for me, he was somebody who I watched when I was a lot younger, and at the time, I wasn't aware of kind of how nasty the relationship had gotten.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily something that I would take into consideration, but I think other fans might.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, of course, like I said, Piazza, one of the greatest of all time, especially at the catcher position. Ryu, a really good pitcher, but just really well liked. And so It's an interesting one because, like you said, I think Ryu is beloved. You're not going to find a single Dodger fan anywhere that doesn't love the guy. Whereas Piazza, I think, was everybody's favorite player when he was in his prime, basically. And yet, if you follow the story out a little bit beyond his time in Los Angeles, it's not pretty. And so it's an interesting one. Let me end with this. I'll give you the 4 number 1 seeds, and you tell me who you like, assuming you pencil these 4 in. So we've already got Jackie Robinson. We've got Pee Wee Reese, Duke Snyder, and Clayton Kershaw. Now, you and I are a little too young to remember 3 of the 4. Of course, Jackie Robinson has made an impact on all of our lives, regardless of if we got to see him play. I will make one other note. I think Vin Scully should be in this bracket, although I think Vin Scully would easily win over everybody else in this bracket. So that might be the issue here. But Kershaw versus Jackie Robinson in the semifinals, assuming you and I don't have a whole lot to offer as far as analysis on Pee Wee Reese and Duke Snyder, Jackie Robinson versus Clayton Kershaw, what do you think?
So, okay, my question, you ended up answering. My question was going to be, or did they set it up so that Kershaw, because I didn't necessarily look at the bracket too in depth, I would have assumed that Kershaw and Jackie Robinson were on opposite ends so that they could meet.
So they would meet in the Final Four, essentially.
Okay. See, I thought that wouldn't come until the championship game. That's interesting.
Kershaw's got to get through Sandy Koufax in the Elite Eight
Oh,
first.
see, yeah.
And
I
Jackie
don't.
Robinson's going to get through Max Muncy simultaneously. So just
Okay,
kidding.
Jack.
Muncy's the 15 seed there. But yeah, so you've got Kershaw versus Koufax is the projected Elite Eight matchup. Jackie Robinson versus Don Sutton. Then you've got Snyder versus Willie Davis and Pee Wee Reese versus Don Drysdale. So those are your final 8 if you just sort of go chalk all the way through. But I think Kershaw Robinson is an interesting one. And I mean, admittedly, I don't know how you really have these conversations because aside from Vin Scully and like maybe our grandparents, the number of people who saw
Right.
all of these guys play, that's kind of one of my issues is I wish it were, hey, let's do the last 20 years, which is what I want to do with you next time on this deal.
Okay.
But Kershaw versus Jackie Robinson, is it possible for Jackie Robinson to lose in this bracket? Like,
Yeah, no, I don't think so. And I think also then you get to a point where like, does it feel wrong voting against Jackie Robinson because he did so much
yeah.
for everybody? Like I would feel bad as much as I have enjoyed watching Clayton Kershaw pitch for the Dodgers and getting to cover him. It just would almost feel wrong to vote against Jackie Robinson.
It's like, does Kershaw want to beat Jackie Robinson? There's no way. Like if in real life, if this existed, Clayton Kershaw is deferring 1,000 times out of 1,000, and everybody in the league honors Jackie Robinson.
He would have already deferred to Sandy Koufax and just never even made it to this matchup.
That's true. That's assuming Koufax could get through Chris Taylor in the first round of these matchups, though. And we're also making the massive assumption that Eric Gagne doesn't just storm through the entire bracket to begin with. And, Kershaw versus Gagne in the Final Four is a whole nother thing. But like I said, next week, what I'd love to do is just go through, me and you, we're going to draft a full roster, starting 9, 1 starter, 1 reliever, and a manager from the last 20 years. So we'll go back and forth, snake draft style. You got to pick 3 outfielders, 4 infielders, a starter, a reliever, a catcher, and a manager. We'll do that next week. But for now, I think that's all we got for tonight. So appreciate you all tuning in and checking it out. Like I said, this is DodgerHeads. We're going to be here once a week for the foreseeable future. We appreciate you listening. Have a good one.